I don't get paid to ask what we're pumping. I don't get paid to worry about the environmental impact, the corporate politics, or the morality of drilling holes in the ocean floor until the planet bleeds. I get paid to keep the pipes from bursting. That's the deal. It's a simple transaction of labor for capital, but the labor happens to be in an environment where physics is constantly trying to turn your internal organs into a soup. When you work saturation diving, you accept a fundamental truth that most people on the surface spend their lives ignoring. You are soft, you are fragile, and you are trespassing. For 28 days at a stretch, you are not a human being in any legal or biological sense that matters. You are a piece of meat preserved in a pressurized steel cylinder, breathing a mixture of helium and oxygen that costs more than a luxury car, suspended in a void where the water pressure is enough to crush a submarine, like an empty soda can. I've been doing this for 15 years. I've done tours in the North Sea, where the waves are like gray walls of concrete, and I've worked the Gulf, where the heat inside the habitat turns your skin into a fungal breeding ground. I thought I'd seen everything the industry had to throw at me. I thought I knew exactly how much my soul was worth by the hour. But the contract for the needle was different. It wasn't just the money, though the money was obscene, triple the standard union rate, wired half up front into an offshore account before I even set foot on the chopper. It was the secrecy. No location listed on the manifest, just a set of coordinates that put us in the middle of a jagged, freezing stretch of the far North Atlantic, miles from the nearest shipping lane. The non-disclosure agreement was the thickness of a phone book. It didn't just cover the usual proprietary technology or drilling locations. It had clauses about biological anomalies and psychological containment protocols. At the time, I signed it without reading the fine print. I needed the money. My ex-wife's lawyers were shark-like in their efficiency, and I was staring down the barrel of a bankruptcy that would have taken my truck, my house, and the last shred of my dignity. So, I sold a month of my life to a shell company with a generic logo and a P.O. box in the Cayman Islands. My partner for this rotation was a kid named Vince. I say kid, but he was close to 30. In this job, though, if you haven't got gray in your beard and a permanent limp from nitrogen bubbles in your joints, you're a kid. He was a good welder, certified on the latest hyperbaric systems, but he had that nervous energy that makes me itch. He was too loud, too eager to fill the silence, constantly talking about his daughter back in Ohio. He showed me her picture on his phone while we were sitting in the transport chopper. A smiling 6-year-old with missing front teeth. I looked at it, nodded, and told him she was cute. I didn't tell him that bringing attachments down to the bottom is a mistake. When you're at depth, you need to be a machine. Machines don't miss their kids. Machines don't get distracted. We saw the rig through the rain-streaked window of the helicopter about 10 minutes out. The pilots called it the Needle, and the name fit. It wasn't one of those sprawling city-sized platforms you see in the promotional videos. It was a single, massive pylon of concrete and rusted steel rising out of the churning gray ocean like a tombstone. There were no support vessels, no supply ships bobbing in the swell, just that solitary, ancient structure standing against the violence of the Atlantic. It looked abandoned. The derrick was silent, the crane arms locked in their stowage positions, and the rust streaks running down the legs looked uncomfortably like dried blood against the gray metal. We landed on a helipad that felt like it hadn't seen a maintenance crew in a decade. The wind was screaming, tearing at our jumpsuits as we grabbed our duffels and ran for the airlock. The transition from the surface world to the saturation system is always jarring. You go from the chaotic noise of the wind and the rotors to the dead, heavy silence of the transfer chamber. This is where the world shrinks. You leave the sky behind. You leave fresh air behind. From this point on, your entire universe is a steel tube 8 feet in diameter. The supervisor, a man named Henson, didn't meet us in person. He was just a voice over the comms loop, and even then, he sounded wrong. Usually the dive supervisor, the super, is a god to the divers. He's the one monitoring your life support, your gas mix, your hot water. He's the voice of authority. Henson sounded tired, not physically exhausted, but spiritually hollowed out. His voice was gruff, detached, and carried the specific, flat affect of a man who is reading from a script he doesn't want to believe. "Welcome to the Needle," Henson said. The speakers in the transfer lock popped with static. "Stow your personal gear in the lockers. You take nothing into the SAT chamber except your liners and your toiletries. No phones. No electronics that haven't been pressure rated. We sanitize everything." I looked at Vince. He was clutching his phone, thumb hovering over his daughter's picture. "You heard the man," I said. "Stow it." Vince hesitated, then shoved the phone into the locker. He looked like he was cutting off a limb. We stripped down and climbed into the transfer capsule. The heavy steel hatch swung shut with a finality that always makes my chest tighten for a second. The hiss of the pressurization started. We were being blown down to storage depth, 800 feet. As the pressure increased, the gas mixture shifted. We began breathing heliox. The nitrogen in normal air is narcotic at depth. It'll make you drunk, stupid, and eventually dead. So they replace it with helium. The side effect, of course, is the voice. As the helium saturated our tissues, our vocal cords vibrated faster. My voice, usually a gravelly baritone, shifted up into a cartoonish squeak. It's the Donald Duck effect. Rookie divers laugh at it. Veterans ignore it. But on the Needle, it felt different. In that rusty, vibrating chamber, our high-pitched voices didn't sound funny. They sounded wrong, like we were becoming something less than human. When we finally equalized with the habitat, the living chamber that would be our home for the next month, the hatch at the bottom of the capsule opened. We dropped down into the main living quarters. It was smaller than I was used to. A cramped cylinder cluttered with valves, gauges, and folded bunks. The air smelled of ozone, chemical disinfectant, and the distinct metallic tang of recycled sweat. It was hot too. The humidity in a saturation system is kept high to prevent static electricity, which is a lethal fire hazard in a high-oxygen environment. So everything is always damp. The bed sheets feel wet. Your skin feels clammy. The walls sweat condensation that runs down behind the insulation mats. I was unpacking my small kit of toiletries when Henson's voice crackled through the squawk box again. "Listen up," he said. The distortion was worse down here, or maybe it was just the pressure playing tricks on my ears. "This rig operates on a unique protocol. Corporate has specific requirements for this location. You'll find a laminated sheet taped to the bulkhead above the comms panel. Read it. Memorize it. If you break a rule, topside cannot help you. Do you copy?" "Copy." I squeaked. I hated the sound of it. Vince moved toward the panel. He peeled a piece of duct tape off the corner of the laminate and held it up. "What is this?" he asked. "A joke?" I walked over and took the sheet from him. It was stained with grease, the edges peeling. The font was standard typewriter, but the words were anything but standard. Operational protocols for depth 800. 1. Keep the external viewport shutters closed between 18,000 and 06,000. No exceptions. 2. If you hear a rhythmic tapping on the hull, do not tap back. 3. Report any fluctuations in water temperature immediately. 4. If your partner's voice drops an octave, end the conversation and cycle the airlock. I read it twice. Voice drops an octave. Vince laughed, a high-pitched nervous sound. Is that a helium mixture thing? Like if the scrubber fails and we get too much nitrogen? Probably, I lied. I wanted to keep him calm. But I knew the physics. Nitrogen narcosis doesn't make your voice drop. It makes you loopy, sure, but the pitch of your voice is determined by the density of the gas you're breathing. To get a voice drop like that, you'd have to be breathing something dense. Sulfur hexafluoride, maybe. Or you'd have to change the shape of your vocal cords entirely. Just a warning about gas toxicity. Standard CYA stuff from legal. And the tapping? Vince pointed at Rule 2. What's that about? Maintenance crews? There are no maintenance crews, Vince. We are the maintenance crew. I taped the list back onto the wall, smoothing it down with my thumb. It's probably just thermal expansion. The rig heats up. The water is cold. The metal groans. Sounds like tapping. They just don't want us freaking out and calling topside every time the pipes settle. Vince didn't look convinced. He looked at the thick, round viewport at the end of the habitat. The shutter was open. Beyond the 4 inches of reinforced acrylic, there was only darkness. Not the darkness of a room with the lights off, but the crushing, absolute black of the abyss. Let's get the gear prepped, I said, breaking the mood. We're on the clock. Our first shift was scheduled for 1400 hours. A routine inspection of the manifold, the massive valve structure sitting on the seabed directly below the rig. Henson briefed us that sensors were picking up a micro leak in the main injection line. Our job was to go down, locate the breach, and weld a patch. Simple. Boring. Exactly what I wanted. We suited up in the wet bell. The process is a ritual. You pull on the hot water suit, a loose-fitting overall pumped full of warm water from the surface to keep you from dying of hypothermia. Then the harness, the bailout bottle, and finally, the helmet. The Kirby Morgan Superlight is a masterpiece of engineering, but when you lock it onto the neck dam, you are sealing yourself away from the world. The click of the locking collar is the sound of finality. Comms check, I said. Loud and clear, Henson replied from topside. Green across the board. You are clear to launch. The bell disconnected from the habitat and began its descent to the seafloor. We were already at pressure, so there was no ear popping, just the mechanical groan of the winch and the sensation of falling. I watched through the bottom viewport as the lights of the bell cut through the water. It was thick with particulate matter, marine snow, the biologists call it. Dead organic matter drifting down from the surface to feed the bottom feeders. It looked like a blizzard in hell. We hit the bottom at 810 feet. The silt billowed up in a gray cloud, momentarily blinding us. When it settled, the manifold loomed out of the darkness like the ruins of a sunken cathedral. It was a tangled mess of pipes and valves, covered in a layer of grime and sea life. I'm stepping out, I said. I unclambered from the bell, the umbilical trailing behind me like a lifeline. The water resistance was immediate. Every movement at this depth is a labor. You don't walk, you wade through molasses. The lights from my helmet cut narrow cones through the gloom. I've got eyes on the manifold, I reported. Valve 3 is weeping. I see bubbles. Copy that, Henson said. Proceed with inspection. I pulled myself along the handrail, floating in near zero gravity. Vince was right behind me, carrying the welding rig. I could hear his breathing over the open mic, fast, shallow breaths. He was scared. Easy, Vince, I said. Just like training. Watch your tether. I reached the leak. It wasn't just a weeping valve. The metal of the pipe looked chewed. That was the only word for it. It wasn't rust, and it wasn't stress fracture. There were deep, jagged gouges in the high-grade steel parallel scratches that looked like they had been made by something with diamond-tipped claws. The edges of the metal were curled outward, as if something had tried to peel the pipe open. "Henson," I said, "I'm looking at damage here. This isn't corrosion. It looks like impact damage. Something hit this pipe hard." "Just patch it, Gordon," Henson said. His voice was sharp. "We don't need a forensic analysis. Seal the leak." I gritted my teeth. "Copy." I signaled Vince to bring the torch. He floated over, handing me the stinger. I struck the arc. The water around the electrode boiled instantly, a violent fizzing sound that vibrated through my skull. I focused on the puddle of molten metal, laying a bead across the gouges. It was rhythmic, hypnotic work. Watch the puddle, move the hand. Watch the puddle, move the hand. For a few minutes, I forgot where I was. I was just a welder doing a job. Then the water moved. It wasn't a current. Current is constant. This was a displacement. A sudden, violent shove of water that hit me in the chest and nearly knocked me off the pipe. "Whoa!" Vince yelled. What was that? I spun around, my helmet light sweeping the darkness behind us. The silt on the seabed was churning. Something had just taken off from the bottom, moving fast. "Did you see that?" Vince asked, his voice pitching up even higher than the helium baseline. "Gordon, look at the sediment." I looked. There was a trench in the mud, freshly dug. It was wide, maybe 6 feet across. Like a snake the size of a subway train had been lying there, watching us, and had just decided to leave. "Just current drag," I said, but my heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I knew it wasn't current. Current doesn't leave tracks. "Focus on the weld, Vince. Let's finish this and get back inside." "That wasn't current," Vince whispered. Something was watching us. "We're at 800 feet, Vince. There are sharks, there are whales, there are squid. It's the ocean. Things live here. Now hold the light steady." We worked for another hour. I laid the patch, sealing the gouges. The whole time, the skin on the back of my neck was prickling. I felt exposed. The darkness beyond our lights felt heavy, like it was pressing in, waiting for a mistake. Every shadow that danced at the edge of my vision looked like movement. Every creak of the manifold sounded like a growl. We finished the job and retreated to the bell. I didn't breathe easy until the hatch was sealed and the water was pumped out. We stripped off the heavy helmets, our faces slick with sweat and condensation. Vince was shaking. "I saw it," he said, staring at the floor plates. "When we were coming back. Just for a second." "Saw what?" "A face," he said. "In the dark. It was pale. It didn't have eyes." "You've got the rapture, kid," I said, referring to the nitrogen narcosis, even though I knew we were on helium. "Your brain is filling in the blanks. Pareidolia. You see patterns in the noise." "It wasn't noise," Vince muttered. We transferred back to the habitat. The smell of the place, that ozone and sweat funk, felt welcoming now. It smelled like safety. We cycled the airlock, dried off, and collapsed into our bunks. The physical exhaustion of a dive is absolute. It drains you to the marrow. I looked at the digital clock on the bulkhead. 18:05. "Shit," Vince said, sitting up. "The shutters." He pointed to the viewport. "Rule number 1, keep the external viewport shutters closed between 1800 and 0600. I had forgotten. The adrenaline of the dive had wiped my memory. Vince scrambled out of his bunk. He reached for the heavy steel wheel that operated the shutter. "Wait," I said. I don't know why I said it. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the way the light from the habitat was spilling out into the black water, illuminating the particulate matter like stars. Vince froze, his hand on the wheel. "What?" "Look," I whispered. Outside, in the pitch black, something was moving. It drifted into the cone of light coming from our window. It was a face, but it wasn't a human face. It was enormous, easily 4 feet across. It was pale, the color of dead fish bellies, and translucent. I could see the dark shapes of organs pulsing beneath the skin. It didn't have eyes, just 2 dark, sensitive patches where eyes should be. And a mouth that was too wide, filled with rows of needle-thin, transparent teeth. It wasn't looking at us. It couldn't see us. It was pressing itself against the glass. I saw the wet, suction cup texture of its skin flatten against the viewport. It was tasting the habitat. It was feeling the warmth radiating from our living space. Vince let out a sound that was half whimper, half scream. He slammed his weight against the locking wheel and spun it hard. The steel shutter crashed down, blocking the view. He spun the lock until his knuckles turned white, sealing us in. "Did you see that?" he hissed, backing away from the porthole until he hit the opposite wall. "Gordon, tell me you saw that. Tell me that wasn't just me." I swallowed. My throat felt dry like I'd been swallowing sand. "I saw it." "That wasn't a fish," Vince said. He was hyperventilating now. That was a monster. That was a goddamn monster. It's deep ocean," I said, trying to force my voice into a rational cadence, trying to be the veteran. "There's things down here we haven't classified. Gigantism is common. It's just biology, Vince, just a big ugly fish." But I knew biology. I've read the textbooks. I've watched the documentaries. Deep-sea gigantism makes things big. Sure, it makes isopods the size of footballs and squid the size of buses. But it doesn't make things that look like a distorted, bloated photocopy of a human face stretched over a frame of cartilage. That thing hadn't looked like an animal. It looked like a mockery. "We need to call Henson," Vince said, reaching for the comms button. "And tell him what?" I grabbed his hand. "That we saw a fish? That we're scared? You want to get scrubbed on day 1? You want to lose that bonus?" Vince pulled his hand away. "I want to go home." "We can't go home," I said grimly. "We're saturated. If we go up now, without decompression, our blood boils and we die screaming. We are stuck here, Vince, for 28 days. So pull it together." He stared at me, his eyes wide and wet. Then he nodded, slowly. He climbed back into his bunk and turned his face to the wall. I lay in my own bunk, staring at the curved steel ceiling, just inches from my nose. I listened to the hum of the scrubbers, the gurgle of the condensation lines. I tried to visualize the paycheck. I tried to visualize the debt disappearing. Then I heard it. Clang. A soft metallic tap on the hull. Right above my head. I froze. Clang. It was rhythmic. Deliberate. It didn't sound like thermal expansion. It didn't sound like the rig settling. It sounded like a knuckle rapping on a door. Clang. Vince sat up. He looked at the ceiling, then at me. His hand came up, making a fist. He was going to knock back. It's a diver reflex. If you hear a noise, you check the hull integrity. You communicate. "Don't," I hissed, lunging across the narrow space and grabbing his wrist. "It's someone out there," Vince whispered. Maybe another diver? There are no other divers, I said, my grip tightening on his arm. Rule number 2. Remember the list. If you hear a rhythmic tapping on the hull, do not tap back. Vince looked at the laminate sheet, then back at the ceiling. The color drained from his face. Clang, clang, clang. We lay there in the silence, suspended in the dark, listening to the thing outside testing the metal of our coffin, waiting to see if anyone was home. The tapping didn't stop for an hour. It was a methodical, patient sound, like a metronome counting down the seconds of our remaining air supply. Clang, clang, clang. It wasn't the chaotic banging of debris caught in a current, and it wasn't the groan of steel contracting under the thermal shift of the Atlantic. It was intelligent. It was a request. Every time the metal rang out, I could feel the vibration travel through the bulkhead, down the frame of my bunk and into my skull. It was probing us, testing the resonance of the habitat, measuring the meat inside the can. Vince lay in the bunk below me, curled into a fetal ball, his hands clamped over his ears. I could hear him whispering the same thing over and over, a frantic mantra of denial. It's just the pipes. It's just the pipes. It's just the pipes. He was trying to rebuild his reality with words, but we both knew the truth. The thing outside, the pale, eyeless face that had tasted the glass, was still there. It hadn't left. It was just waiting for an invitation. I didn't sleep. You don't sleep when you're a saturation diver. You just drift in and out of a chemical fugue state, your brain trying to process the helium tremors and the constant crushing pressure. I stared at the rivets on the ceiling, counting them, doing mental calculations of partial pressures and decompression tables. Anything to keep the fear from paralyzing my diaphragm. If you panic at depth, you die. Your breathing rate spikes. The CO2 builds up in your helmet or your lungs, and you black out. So I forced my breathing to slow. In for 4. Hold for 4. Out for 4. Around 04 Thirud, the tapping stopped. The silence that followed was worse. It was a heavy, expectant silence, the kind that hangs in the air before a storm breaks. I lay there, straining my ears, listening for the scrape of claws or the hiss of a breaching seal. But there was only the hum of the scrubbers and the rhythmic thrum of the umbilical pumps sending us hot water and gas from the surface. When the shift tones finally blared at 070, it felt like a physical blow. The harsh electronic buzz cut through the stagnant air, jarring Vince out of his stupor. He sat up, his eyes bloodshot and rimmed with dark circles, his skin pale and clammy. He looked like a man who had aged 10 years in a single night. Henson's voice crackled through the comms a moment later. "Morning, ladies. Rise and shine." There was no warmth in his voice today. No forced camaraderie. He sounded tense, his words clipped and distorted by the scrambler. "We have a situation," Henson continued, skipping the usual pleasantries. "Telemetry shows a catastrophic pressure drop in Sector 4. The manifold injection line is losing containment. You need to go back out." I grabbed the mic, my hand shaking with a mixture of exhaustion and anger. "We just patched Sector 4 yesterday," I snapped, my voice squeaking in the helium atmosphere. "The weld was solid, Henson. I laid that bead myself. It was X-ray quality. There is no way it failed overnight." "Sensors don't lie, Gordon," Henson replied, his tone hard. "We're losing product. The pressure curve is flatlining. Get in the water, now." I looked at Vince. He was staring at the floor plates, shaking his head slowly. "I can't go back out there, G. I can't do it." "Vince, listen to me," I said, dropping my voice. trying to cut through the panic rising in his chest. If the pressure drops in that line, the pipe bursts. If the pipe bursts at this depth, the shockwave will hit this habitat like a depth charge. It will crumple us. It is safer outside than inside if this thing blows. Do you understand me? He looked up, tears brimming in his eyes. It's waiting for us, Gordon. Then we don't give it a chance, I lied. We go down, we fix the leak, we come back. Fast and clean. Just mechanics, Vince. Just physics. It took us 20 minutes to suit up. The routine that usually felt like a comforting ritual now felt like dressing for a funeral. The hot water suits were clammy and smelled of mildew. The neck dams of the helmets felt like nooses. When I locked Vince's helmet into place, I checked the seal 3 times, terrified that I would see that pale face reflected in his visor. We transferred to the bell and began the descent back to the seafloor. The water outside the viewport was different today. Yesterday, the marine snow had been white, organic detritus drifting down. Today, the water was clouded with a dark, oily suspension. It swirled around the bell lights, thick and roiling, like smoke trapped in a jar. Visibility is shit, I reported to topside. Whatever is leaking, it's clouding the entire column. Copy, Henson said. Proceed with caution. The leak is your priority. We hit the bottom, the bell settling into the silt with a soft thud. I checked my gauges. All green. I took a breath of the heliox, the gas tasting metallic and cold, and unlatched the hatch. I'm out, I said. I dropped into the water. The darkness was absolute, a physical weight pressing against my faceplate. My helmet lights cut a pathetic cone through the murky water. The silt was churning violently, whipped up by some unseen current. I pulled myself along the guide wire toward the manifold. Vince was right behind me, his breathing loud and ragged over the open loop. Stay close, I ordered. Hand on my tether. We reached the valve assembly. I floated over to the section of pipe we had repaired less than 12 hours ago. I expected to see a cracked weld, maybe a stress fracture from the thermal shift. What I saw made my blood run cold. The patch was gone. It hadn't cracked. It hadn't burst. It was gone. The steel plate I had welded over the gouges had been peeled back like the lid of a sardine can. The metal was twisted and torn, the edges jagged and bright, as if immense force had been applied to rip the alloy apart. And the substance leaking out wasn't oil. It was black, yes. But it didn't shimmer like crude. It was matte, absorbing the light from my torch. It was viscous, thick like molasses, but it didn't float up toward the surface like oil should. It coiled. It moved with a disturbing semi-solid fluidity, swirling around the pipe in lazy, hypnotic spirals before drifting upward. What is that? Vince asked, his voice trembling. I reached out, running a gloved finger through the plume. The substance coated my glove, sticky and heavy. I brought it closer to my faceplate. It wasn't just fluid. It was particulate. It looked like millions of tiny black eggs suspended in gel. Henson, I said, my voice tight. We have a breach. But the product, it's wrong. It's coagulating. And the patch didn't fail. It was removed. Something ripped the steel off. Just fix the pipe, Gordon. Henson replied instantly. His voice was higher now, strained. He was scared. What aren't you telling us? I demanded, staring at the torn metal. This isn't crude oil. This isn't natural gas. What are we pumping? Fix the pipe, Henson barked. That is a direct order. If you don't seal that breach in the next 10 minutes, we lose containment on the whole sector. "You're lying to me," I said, but I grabbed the welding torch from Vince. I didn't have a choice. If the pressure blew, we were dead. "Vince, prep the replacement plate. We're doing a double pass. I want this thing sealed so tight God himself couldn't open it." Vince handed me the plate, his hands shaking so badly he almost dropped it. I clamped it over the breech and struck the arc. The water boiled, the bright flash of the magnesium rod illuminating the gloom. As I worked, the black sludge coated my faceplate. I tried to wipe it off, but it smeared, leaving a greasy, opaque film. It was harder to see. I had to get closer, my helmet almost touching the pipe. Then, the sound started. It wasn't a tap this time. It was a hum, a low, vibrating frequency that I felt in my teeth, in the fillings of my molars. It wasn't mechanical. It was organic. It was a purr. "Gordon," Vince whispered, "look at the gauge." I glanced at the pressure gauge on the manifold, barely visible through the smear on my visor. The needle was spinning, not fluctuating, spinning, clockwise, then counterclockwise, wildly. "It's not the pressure," I realized, my stomach dropping. "It's magnetic interference. Something is generating a massive field right next to us." Suddenly, my helmet light flickered. It buzzed, dimmed, and then died completely. "Vince, I lost light," I said, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. "Shine on me." I can't," Vince said. His voice was small, terrified. "It's blocking me." "What is?" "The wall. The moving wall." I fumbled for my backup torch on my harness, clicking it on. The beam was weak, a pencil-thin ray of LED light, but it was enough to show me what was happening. Vince was floating 5 feet away from me. Between us, eclipsing him completely, was a wall of flesh. It was the creature, the thing from the window. But seeing it in the open water, without the distortion of the viewport, destroyed any hope I had that it was just a fish. It was massive, a serpentine coil of pale, gelatinous muscle that seemed to go on forever. It was wrapped around the manifold, its body thick as a redwood trunk. It wasn't attacking us. It was ignoring us. It was focused entirely on the leak. The creature's head, if you could call it that, was pressed against the pipe where the black fluid was escaping. Its mouth was open, a cavern of translucent flesh, and it was sucking the sludge directly from the breech. It was feeding. The oil wasn't a product. It was bait. Or food. The creature pulsed as it swallowed, its skin shifting colors. Chromatophores flashed in mesmerizing patterns, ripples of deep indigo, violet, and a sickening bruised yellow. It was beautiful in a way that made me want to vomit. "Don't move," I breathed into the mic. "Vince, do not thrash. Back away slowly." Inch by inch, we retreated toward the bell. My heart was hammering so hard I thought it would burst my eardrums. We were insignificant. We were ants repairing a sugar bowl while a tiger lapped at the spill. The creature shifted. One of its massive, pale coils slid over the section of pipe I had just been welding. The heat must have annoyed it. Or maybe it just sensed movement. It turned. That face. That nightmare face. It rotated toward us, displacing a massive volume of water that shoved me backward. The eyeless patches on its head seemed to flare, sensing the electrical impulses of our suits, the heat of our bodies. It opened its mouth, revealing rows of needle teeth that folded inward like a conveyor belt. It let out a sound, a shriek that wasn't a sound wave, but a pressure wave. It hit me like a physical punch to the chest. My vision blurred. The readout inside my helmet scrambled into static. "Run!" I yelled, abandoning protocol. "Get to the bell! Go! Go!" We scrambled through the water, hauling ourselves along the umbilical. I didn't look back. I could feel the water turbulence behind me, the massive displacement of something swimming fast. I expected to feel teeth closing around my legs, the crushing weight of a tentacle snapping my spine. We hit the moon pool of the bell and scrambled up inside. I slammed the hatch shut and spun the wheel, locking it down. "Pump it!" I screamed. "Drain the water." Vince was hyperventilating, tearing at his helmet before the water was even fully drained. He ripped it off, gasping for air, his face gray. "It was eating it," he gasped, spit flying from his lips. "Did you see that?" "It was drinking the sludge. I saw it," I said, stripping my own gear with trembling hands. "We're not drilling for oil, Gordon," Vince said, his eyes wild. "We're harvesting that food. We're feeding it. We're keeping it alive." "Calm down," I said, though I was anything but calm. "We need to tell Henson. We need to abort." "Henson knows," Vince shouted, slamming his fist against the bell wall. "That's why the pay is so high. That's why the rules. Don't tap back. Keep the shutters closed. They know it's down here." We docked with the habitat and crawled back into the living chamber. The air smelled foul today. The ozone tang was gone, replaced by a heavy cloying scent like rotten eggs and copper. I went straight to the comms panel. I didn't care about protocol anymore. I smashed the call button. "Topside, this is Gordon. We have a biological hazard. A Leviathan-class organism is interfering with the infrastructure. We are aborting the dive." I repeat, we are aborting. Static. Long, heavy static. "Topside, do you copy?" "I copy," Henson said. But his voice was different. It was clearer. Closer. There was none of the usual distortion. "Gordon, listen to me carefully. Do not abort. If you stop the flow, the creature gets aggressive. It needs the feed." I froze. "You knew," I whispered. "You're feeding a monster?" "We're containing it," Henson said, his voice flat, factual. "The black fluid isn't food, Gordon. It's a sedative. It's a specialized biological compound we pump down to keep it dormant. If you stop the flow, it wakes up. Fully. It's already awake, Henson." I yelled into the mic. It peeled the steel back. It looked right at us. "Then you have a problem," Henson said. "Because the storm topside just severed the main lift cable. We can't pull you up. You're stuck down there until the weather clears." The line clicked dead. I stared at the panel. We were trapped. 800 feet down, with a creature that was waking up, and a supervisor who had just cut us loose. I turned to tell Vince. He wasn't looking at me. He was standing by the viewport, staring at the steel shutter we had locked down the night before. "Vince," I said, my voice warning. "Step away from the window." He didn't move. He tilted his head, pressing his ear against the cold metal of the hull next to the glass. "I hear her," Vince whispered. "Who?" "My daughter," he said, a smile breaking across his face that looked entirely wrong in the dim red light of the habitat. "She's outside. She's knocking." Clang. 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 The sound was back, right on the shutter, gentle, insistent. "Vince, that's the creature," I said, stepping toward him. "It mimics sounds. It's a predator. Remember the rules." "No," Vince said, his eyes glassy, unfocused. "It's Sarah. I can hear her crying. She says she's cold. She says she wants Daddy to let her in." End quote. He reached for the locking wheel of the shutter. "Don't do it," I said, measuring the distance between us. "Vince, if you open that, we die. She's just a little girl, Gordon," he murmured, his hand closing around the cold steel of the wheel. "How can I leave her out there in the dark?" He started to turn the wheel. The metal shrieked, a high, piercing sound of rusted threads moving against the pressure. I lunged. I hit him with my shoulder, driving him away from the viewport. We crashed into the opposite bunk, a tangle of limbs in desperation. Vince was strong, stronger than he looked, and panic had given him a hysterical, wiry energy. He clawed at my face, his fingernails digging into my cheek. "Let me open it," he screamed, his voice cracking. "She's drowning. Can't you hear her? She's drowning." I pinned him against the mattress, jamming my forearm against his throat. "It's not real," I shouted right into his face. "It's in your head. Listen to me. It is not real." But as I held him there, panting, sweating, I heard it too. Through the hull, clear as a bell, cutting through the thick steel walls. "Daddy, please. It's so dark." It wasn't a monster's growl. It wasn't a mimic. It was a recording. It was perfect. The pitch, the cadence, the terrified tremble of a 6-year-old girl. It was the sound of Vince's daughter. I looked at Vince. He wasn't fighting anymore. He was weeping, silent, racking sobs that shook his whole body. And then the voice changed. It didn't come from outside. It came from the vent above our heads. "Daddy?" I looked up. A drop of black liquid, thick, viscous, and dark as night, oozed through the grate of the air scrubber and landed on the floor between us. Then, another, and another. The leak wasn't just outside anymore. The creature wasn't just outside. The system was compromised. We were breathing it. Vince looked at the black drop on the floor. He stopped crying. He looked at me, and his eyes were suddenly very clear, and very, very empty. "She's not outside," he whispered. "She's in the vents." He pushed me off him with a strength that shouldn't have been possible. He stood up, wiping the blood from his lip, and looked at the airlock door. "We have to go find her, Gordon," he said. "We have to go into the walls." The tapping on the hull got louder, faster, impatient. Clang, 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 clang. And for the first time, I realized the rhythm wasn't random. It was Morse code. O-P-E-N. 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 I backed away until my back hit the comms panel. I hit the button for Henson, praying for a signal, for a lie, for anything. "Topside," I screamed. "Topside. The habitat is breached. We have ingress. The biological agent is inside." But the only answer was the static, and the soft, wet sound of the black sludge dripping onto the floor, pooling around Vince's bare feet as he walked toward the airlock. I tackled him before his hand could complete the first rotation of the airlock wheel. In a standard room, at standard pressure, Vince might have been able to hold me off. He was younger, stronger, a gym rat who prided himself on his bench press. But we weren't in a standard room. We were in a steel coffin suspended in the crushing dark, breathing a gas mixture that made our lungs feel light and our muscles twitch with chemically induced tremors. And Vince wasn't fighting with muscle. He was fighting with a frantic, hallucinatory desperation that made him sloppy. I hit him at the waist, driving my shoulder into his kidney. We slammed into the bulkhead with a hollow thud that vibrated through the entire habitat. The impact knocked the wind out of him, but he didn't let go of the wheel. His fingers were locked around the cold steel like claws, his knuckles white, his tendons standing out like wire cables under his pale skin. "Let me go!" he shrieked, his voice distorted by the helium into a high, piercing sound that scraped against my eardrums. "She's waiting. She's cold, Gordon. She's so cold. She's not there," I roared back, grabbing his wrist and wrenching it backward. I felt something pop in his forearm, a subtle grind of cartilage, but he didn't even flinch. The pain receptors in his brain had been short-circuited by the adrenaline or the black sludge or whatever madness had taken root in his gray matter. "It's a recording." "It's the thing outside." He kicked backward, his heel catching me in the shin, sending a jolt of agony up my leg. I gritted my teeth and used my weight to pin him against the door. The airlock was the only thing standing between us and an instant, violent death. If he cracked that seal even a fraction of an inch without the bell mated to it, the pressure differential would turn us into red mist before our brains could even register that we were dead. It wouldn't be a drowning, it would be an implosion. Biology versus physics, and physics always wins. I jammed my forearm against his throat, cutting off his air. "Look at me, Vince. Look at me." His eyes were wide, the pupils dilated so far that the irises were just thin rings of brown. They darted frantically around the small space, seeing things I couldn't see, tracking invisible movements in the air. "The vents," he choked out, spittle flying onto my face. "They're coming through the vents. The black rain. It's the baptism, Gordon. It's the oil that isn't oil." I looked up, momentarily distracted. The black sludge was still dripping from the air scrubber grate above us. Drip. 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 It was pooling on the floor plates, a dark, shimmering puddle that seemed to absorb the dim red emergency lighting rather than reflect it. It smelled of ancient decay, of things that had died a million years ago and been left to rot in the dark. It smelled like the grave. "Stop it," I hissed, tightening my grip on his throat. "Pass out. Just pass out, damn you." I held him there for what felt like an hour, but was probably only 2 minutes. Slowly, the fight drained out of him. His thrashing turned to twitching, and then his limbs went slack. He slumped against the door, sliding down until he was sitting in the puddle of black slime. He didn't lose consciousness, not fully, but he retreated somewhere deep inside his own head, his eyes staring blankly at the opposite wall, his mouth moving in a silent, rapid prayer. I backed away, gasping for air, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I checked the airlock wheel. It hadn't moved. The seal was intact. We were safe, for a given definition of the word. I looked at my hands. They were trembling violently. I wiped them on my jumpsuit, but the feeling of Vince's clammy skin lingered. I needed to think. I needed to be rational. I was a saturation diver. I was a technician. I solved problems. That was my job. Problem. The habitat is compromised. Evidence. Biological agent ingress through the HVAC system. Problem. Personnel compromised. Evidence. Vince is hallucinating and attempting sabotage. Problem. Command and control failure. Evidence. Henson is silent. I walked over to the comms panel, my boots squelching in the thin layer of black fluid that was slowly spreading across the floor. I didn't smash the button this time. I pressed it calmly, holding it down, forcing my voice to be steady, low, and clear. "Henson," I said. "I know you're there. I can hear the carrier wave. The static is different when the line is open. You're listening." Silence. Just the hum of the electrical systems and the wet sound of Vince's breathing. "Vince is down," I continued. He tried to blow the hatch. I neutralized him. But we have a leak inside the habitat. The sedative, if that's what it really is coming through the scrubbers. We are breathing it. We are absorbing it through our skin. If you don't talk to me, Henson, if you don't give me something to work with, I am going to assume you have written us off. I paused, waiting. And if you have written us off, I said, leaning closer to the mic, I am going to start breaking things. I know where the telemetry sensors are. I know where the override for the manifold injection is. I can't go up, but I can make sure this rig never pumps another barrel of whatever hell broth you're harvesting down here. I will blind you, Henson. I will make this rig a billion-dollar paperweight. It was a bluff mostly. Destroying the sensors wouldn't save us, but it threatened the one thing the company cared about, the asset. The speaker crackled. A long, heavy sigh came through, sounding like wind rushing through a tunnel. Gordon, Henson said. He sounded old, tired. Don't touch the sensors. Talk to me, I demanded. What is happening? The storm is real, Henson said. That part wasn't a lie. We have 40-foot swells topside. The crane is twisted metal. We can't launch a recovery bell even if we wanted to. You are stuck. I figured that part out, I snapped. Tell me about the sludge. Tell me about the previous crew. There was a pause. I could hear papers shuffling in the background, or maybe it was the sound of Henson rubbing his face with a calloused hand. The previous crew didn't transfer, Henson said softly. You found the logbook, didn't you? Miller's book. I found it. Miller was imaginative, Henson said, choosing his words carefully. But he wasn't wrong. We lost contact with them on day 20. The telemetry showed life support was active, but nobody answered the comms. Just like now. We thought it was a comms failure. We sent a ROV down to check the hull. And the shutters were open, Henson said. All of them. And the habitat was empty. My stomach turned over. Empty? How? The airlock? The airlock was sealed from the inside, Henson whispered. They didn't leave through the door, Gordon. We don't know how they left. We just know they were gone. And the walls, the inside of the habitat was coated in that black stuff. We cleaned it. We scrubbed it. We thought we got it all. You sent us down here to die, I said. It wasn't a question. We sent you down to fix the leak, Henson corrected, his voice hardening slightly. The company thought if we kept the flow going, kept the creature sedated, it would be safe. They thought Miller's crew just cracked under the pressure. Isolation psychosis. They didn't believe the reports about the biology. But you did, I said. You knew. I suspected, Henson admitted. But I have a mortgage, Gordon. I have alimony. I have a life that requires me to sit in this chair and tell you everything is fine. Just like you have debts that made you sign that NDA without reading it. I wanted to reach through the wire and strangle him. But anger was a luxury I couldn't afford. The sludge is inside, I repeated. It's coming through the vents. How do I stop it? You can't stop it from inside the main chamber, Henson said. The intake valve is on the exterior scrubber unit, but there is a manual cutoff in the transfer trunk, between the habitat and the bell. If you can get into the trunk and close the auxiliary intake, you might be able to isolate the habitat from the main feed. End quote. The transfer trunk. The small vertical tunnel that connected our living space to the diving bell. It was a cold, cramped space, usually used for storing gear and transferring between the dry habitat and the wet bell. I'm going, I said. Monitor Vince. If he moves, you yell. You blast the alarm. Do you understand? I'll watch him, Henson promised. Gordon, be careful in the trunk. The shielding there is thinner. The acoustics are better, or worse, depending on how you look at it. I didn't answer. I grabbed a heavy wrench from the tool rack, a 24-inch pipe wrench that weighed about 8 pounds. It felt solid in my hand, a simple, brutal tool for a complex, nightmare world. I stepped over Vince. He was still sitting in the sludge, muttering to himself. I leaned down to check on him. "Vince?" He looked up. His eyes were focused now, but not on me. He was looking through me. "The door is thin," Vince whispered. "The skin is thin. We are the yolk, Gordon. We are the yolk inside the egg, and the shell is cracking. Stay here," I said. "Don't touch anything." I walked to the rear of the habitat and spun the wheel for the transfer trunk hatch. It opened with a hiss of equalizing pressure. I climbed through the circular opening and pulled the hatch shut behind me, locking it. I was now isolated in the vertical cylinder between the habitat and the bell. It was freezing in here. The heaters didn't work as well in the trunk. My breath plumed in the air, a white fog that swirled in the red emergency light. The walls were sweating condensation, cold rivulets of water running down the steel. I looked for the auxiliary intake valve. Henson said it was manual. I scanned the tangle of pipes and conduits running along the wall. There. A red wheel, rusted and tucked behind a bundle of hydraulic lines. I reached for it, fitting the wrench onto the nut to give me leverage. It was seized. I gritted my teeth and put my weight into it. Creak. It moved a fraction of an inch. Clang. The sound came from right next to my ear. I froze. The tapping wasn't on the habitat hull. It was on the bell. The diving bell was mated to the bottom of the trunk, just a few feet below me. The hatch to the bell was open. We left it open to facilitate airflow and drying of the gear. I looked down through the open hatch into the bell. It was dark down there, just the faint reflection of the red light from the trunk filtering down. The bell was hanging in the water, open to the ocean at the bottom moon pool, but sealed by the pressure. Clang. Something was tapping on the outside of the bell. But that wasn't what stopped my heart. What stopped my heart was what I saw on the inside wall of the transfer trunk, right at eye level. I hadn't seen it before, because it had been covered by a hanging diving suit, which I had moved to get to the valve. It was scratching. Deep, frantic gouges in the steel. Words. I leaned closer, my breath hitching in my throat. The letters were jagged, carved with a knife or a screwdriver, desperate and messy. Miller, day 22. It's not a rig. It's a syringe. We are the virus. Don't let EIN. Don't let EOUT. Day 22. Henson had said they lost contact on day 20. He said they vanished. But Miller had been alive. He had been alive, and he had been hiding in the transfer trunk, carving his final testament into the steel while something hunted him. "It's a syringe," I whispered, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. The needle, the shape of the platform, the injection lines, the sedative. We weren't just drilling, we were injecting. We were pumping something into the earth, or into the creature. And the black sludge, that wasn't the product. That was the reaction. That was the antibody. The creature wasn't attacking the rig because it was hungry. It was attacking the rig because the rig was a needle stuck in its flesh, and we were the poison being pushed through the tip. A sound from below made me look down into the bell again. The water in the moon pool, the open hole in the bottom of the bell where we entered and exited, was churning. I watched, paralyzed, as a hand reached up out of the water. It wasn't the pale, translucent claw of the creature. It was a glove. A standard issue, black neoprene diving glove. Then an arm, a shoulder, A helmet. A diver was climbing up into the bell. My brain stalled. Impossible. There were only two of us. Vince was in the habitat. I was in the trunk. There was no one else. The figure hauled itself up onto the internal platform of the bell. It was wearing a yellow Kirby Morgan helmet, battered and scratched, the paint peeling. The suit was old, patched in a dozen places with duct tape and sealant. It looked like it had been rotting underwater for years. The diver stood up, water cascading off the suit. It looked up through the hatch, straight at me. The faceplate was dark. I couldn't see inside. "Who are you?" I stammered, my voice barely a squeak. "Identify yourself." The diver raised a gloved hand. It pointed at me. Then it pointed at the wall, at the message Miller had carved. It reached up and unlatched the neck dam of the helmet. I wanted to look away. I knew, with a primal certainty, that I should not look at what was inside that helmet. But I couldn't move. The diver twisted the helmet and lifted it off. There was no head. The suit was filled with the black sludge. It was a skin, a hollow shell filled with the viscous coagulated fluid. As the helmet came off, the sludge didn't spill out. It held its shape. It formed a glistening amorphous blob where a head should be. And then, features began to form. A mouth. A wide, lipless slash in the black slime. "Gordon," it said. The voice didn't come from the bell. It came from the comms speaker on the wall next to me. It bypassed the physics of sound. It was electronic, digital, synthesized from the dead telemetry of the rig. "Open the door," I screamed. I couldn't help it. I swung the wrench, smashing it against the hatch of the bell, trying to slam it shut. But the hatch opened downward. I had to reach down, toward that thing, to pull it up and seal it. The sludge thing in the suit began to climb the ladder toward me. It moved with a fluid, impossible grace, the heavy diving gear making no sound on the metal rungs. I abandoned the valve. I abandoned the hatch. I scrambled backward, fumbling for the handle of the door leading back to the habitat. "Henson!" I yelled. "It's inside! It's inside the bell!" I wrenched the door open and fell into the habitat, scrambling across the floor on my hands and knees. I kicked the door shut behind me and spun the wheel, locking it. I leaned against the cold steel, gasping, my lungs burning. Vince was standing in the middle of the room. He was looking at the vent again. The puddle of sludge on the floor had grown. It was covering half the habitat now. "Did you find him?" Vince asked. His voice was calm, conversational. "Find who?" I wheezed. "Miller," Vince said. "He told me he was coming up to say hello." I stared at Vince. "Miller is dead, Vince. That thing in the suit isn't human." Vince smiled. It was a slow, stretching smile that showed too many teeth. "None of us are human, Gordon. Not anymore. We're just containers. We're just vessels for the new oil." He pointed to the viewport. The shutter was still closed, but the metal was vibrating. Clang. 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 The rhythm had changed. It wasn't Morse code anymore. It was a heartbeat. A slow, thudding rhythm that matched the pulsing of the sludge on the floor. Thump thump. Thump thump. "It wants to show you," Vince said. "It wants to show you the truth about the needle." "I don't want to see it," I said, backing away until I hit the bunks. "You have to," Vince said. "You're the supervisor now. You have to sign off on the transfer." He walked toward the comms panel. He didn't press the button to talk to Henson. He reached under the console and ripped out a handful of wires. Sparks showered down, fizzing in the wet air. "No more Henson," Vince said. "Just us. And the family." "Vince," "Stop." I lunged for him, but he was fast. He sidestepped me and grabbed the emergency flare gun from the wall rack. He leveled it at my chest. The bore of the flare gun looked like a cannon in the small room. "Sit down, Gordon," Vince said softly. I froze. "Vince, put it down. That's a magnesium flare. If you fire that in here, in this oxygen mix, we burn. We turn into a torch." "I know," Vince said. "That's why you're going to listen." He gestured with the gun. "Sit." I sat on the edge of my bunk. The sludge was lapping at the toes of my boots. "The creature isn't attacking us," Vince explained, speaking with the terrifying lucidity of the insane. "It's trying to save us. The needle. It hurts the world. It hurts the mother. We are the infection. We are the virus, just like Miller said. But the mother, she's kind. She doesn't want to kill us. She wants to change us. She wants to make us part of the cure." He looked at the black slime on the floor. "Drink it, Gordon." "What?" "The communion," Vince said. "Drink it. It stops the fear. It stops the pain. It makes the voice stop dropping." He reached down and dipped his free hand into the sludge. He brought it to his mouth. "Don't," I shouted. He licked his fingers. He swallowed. For a second, nothing happened. Then, Vince gasped. His back arched. His eyes rolled back in his head. The veins in his neck turned black, standing out like spiderwebs against his skin. He convulsed, dropping the flare gun. It skittered across the floor, sliding into the sludge. I dove for it. Vince screamed, a sound that started as a human cry and tore itself into something else. A baritone roar that shook the rivets of the habitat. "Open," he bellowed. The lights flared bright white, then died. Total darkness. Then the red emergency lights flickered on, dim and bloody. In the red gloom I saw Vince. He was standing again, but he was taller. His joints were wrong. His arms hung too low. The black sludge was oozing from his pores, coating him, transforming him. He looked at me. His eyes were gone. Just black pools of liquid. "The rules were wrong, Gordon," Vince said, his voice vibrating in my chest cavity. "Rule number 1 is a lie." He turned toward the viewport. "We don't keep the shutters closed to keep it out," he rumbled. "We keep them closed so we don't see what we are becoming." He reached for the wheel of the shutter. "Look, Gordon. Look at the face of God." I scrambled backward, clutching the flare gun, my back pressing against the cold steel of the airlock door. Vince spun the wheel. The shutter fell away. I looked. I couldn't help it. Outside, illuminated by the faint bioluminescence of the deep, the ocean was alive. It wasn't water anymore. It was a swirling, writhing mass of the black sludge, extending as far as the eye could see. And floating in it, suspended in the gel, were thousands of them. Pale, translucent faces. They were all looking at us. And in the center, pressed against the glass, was the massive, ancient face of the creature. But now I saw it clearly. It wasn't just a face. It was a reflection. It was a distorted, monstrous reflection of the rig itself. The mouth was the drill site. The eyes were the lights of the habitat. We weren't fighting a monster. We were inside it. Vince laughed, a wet, gurgling sound. "Welcome home," he said. And then the glass cracked. Kirk. A single, jagged spiderweb fracture appeared in the center of the viewport. A drop of black water seeped through. I raised the flare gun. I aimed it at the glass. If I fired, we died. If I didn't fire, the ocean came in. "Vince!" I screamed. "Get away from the window." He didn't move. He just pressed his hand against the cracking glass, as if greeting an old friend. "Let it in," he whispered. The crack widened. The habitat groaned, the metal screaming under the strain. I pulled the hammer back on the flare gun. Click. The sound was deafening in the silence. Vince turned his head slowly to look at me. "You can't kill what is already dead, Gordon." He smiled, and then the lights went out for good. The darkness wasn't empty. It was heavy, physical, a suffocating blanket that smelled of ozone and ancient rotting kelp. When the lights died, the only thing left was the sound. It started as a hiss, high-pitched and violent, like a steam valve blowing out, but it quickly deepened into a roar. The crack in the viewport wasn't just a fracture anymore, it was a breach. At 800 feet, water doesn't just leak, it cuts. The pressure differential between the Atlantic Ocean and our pressurized tin can was turning a hairline fracture into a water jet cutter capable of slicing through bone. I didn't move. I couldn't. My brain was trying to reboot, trying to switch from the panic of the supernatural to the cold, hard logic of survival. I was blind, deafened by the screaming of the metal, and standing in a pool of black sludge that was rapidly being diluted by freezing seawater. "Do you feel it, Gordon?" Vince's voice came from everywhere and nowhere. It didn't sound like it was coming from a throat anymore. It sounded like it was coming from the walls, vibrating through the steel floor plates and up into my skeleton. It was wet, gurgling, as if his lungs were already full of the fluid. "The mother is coming in. She's breaking the shell." I fumbled for my belt, my fingers numb and clumsy. I needed light. I needed to see what I was fighting. I found the cylindrical shape of the emergency chem light I kept clipped to my hip. I snapped it and shook it. A sickly, neon green glow flooded the habitat. It didn't push the darkness back, it just stained it. The shadows stretched and twisted, looking like living things. And there was Vince. He was standing directly in front of the viewport. The jet of water spraying through the crack was hitting him square in the chest. It should have knocked him down. It should have flayed the skin from his ribs. But he just stood there, arms spread wide in a grotesque parody of a messianic embrace. The water hit him and sprayed outward in a mist that filled the room, soaking everything. But the water running off him wasn't clear. It was black. The ocean was mixing with the sludge inside him, and he was leaking. His skin was gray, translucent, and I could see the black veins pulsing beneath the surface, pumping that alien oil through a heart that had stopped beating as a human organ minutes ago. "Vince!" I screamed, the helium distortion of my voice lost in the roar of the water. "Get away from the glass. It's going to blow." He turned his head slowly. The movement was jerky, mechanical. His eyes were gone. The sockets were overflowing with the black fluid, weeping tears of tar down his cheeks. "It's not going to blow," he rumbled. "It's going to bloom." He took a step toward me. He didn't walk, he shambled, his legs moving with a heavy, unnatural gait. The water on the floor was rising fast, swirling around our ankles. It was freezing, stupidly, brutally cold. The heating elements in the floor were already shorted out. The cold bit through my boots, sending spikes of pain up my legs. "Join us, Gordon. It's lonely in the dry." I raised the flare gun. My hand was shaking so bad the barrel was dancing in the green light. I had one shot, one magnesium slug that burned at 2,000 degrees. In a high oxygen environment, firing this thing was suicide. It would turn the air into fire. We would burn before we drowned. But I didn't have a choice. "Stay back," I yelled. "I'll do it." "I swear to God, Vince, I'll burn us both." Vince smiled. His mouth was full of the sludge. It coated his teeth, making his grin look like a black hole in his face. "Fire cleanses," he whispered. "But water transforms." He lunged. He moved faster than a dead thing should. He closed the distance in a heartbeat. His hands, fingers fused together by the black slime, reaching for my throat. I didn't fire. Survival instinct is a funny thing. It overrides logic. My brain knew I should shoot, but my body refused to pull the trigger on a suicide pact. Instead, I swung the heavy flare gun like a hammer. The barrel connected with Vince's temple with a sickening crunch. It felt like hitting a bag of wet cement. There was no resistance, no snap of bone. The metal just sank into the sodden, gray flesh. Vince didn't even grunt. The impact knocked his head to the side, but he snapped it back instantly. He grabbed my wrist, his grip like a hydraulic clamp. The cold radiating from his hand burned my skin. "Let it go," he growled, the vibration traveling up my arm. He squeezed. I felt the bones in my wrist grind together. My fingers went numb, and the flare gun clattered into the rising water. "No!" I shouted, swinging my left fist into his face. I hit him again, and again, driving my knuckles into his nose, his jaw, his eyes. It was like punching a corpse that had been underwater for a week. His flesh was spongy, yielding, and cold. He didn't fight back. He just held me. He pulled me closer, dragging me into a bear hug. The smell coming off him was overpowering. Rotten eggs, copper, and the deep, salty stench of the abyss. "Listen," he whispered into my ear, his wet lips brushing my skin. "Listen to the choir." I struggled, kicking at his shins, kneeing him in the groin. Nothing worked. He was an anchor, dragging me down into the rising water. The level was at our calves now. The spray from the window was getting louder, a screaming whistle that drilled into my skull. I looked over Vince's shoulder at the viewport. The spiderweb crack had expanded. A chunk of glass the size of a dinner plate was pulsating, bowing inward with every throb of the ocean outside. It was seconds away from failure. I couldn't save him. I knew that. The Vince who showed me pictures of his daughter, the kid who worried about his welding beads. He was gone. He had been digested from the inside out. What was holding me was just the husk, the puppet. I had to get to the transfer trunk. It was the only way out. The hatch was behind me, 10 feet away. I stopped fighting his grip. I went limp. Vince paused, sensing the change in tension. "You surrender?" "Yeah," I wheezed. "Yeah, Vince, I surrender. Just let me hear it." He loosened his grip slightly, shifting his hands to cup my face, like a priest bestowing a blessing. "Good. Good. The mother loves you, Gordon." I waited until his hands were on my cheeks, blinding me, his thumbs pressing into my eyes. Then I drove my forehead into the bridge of his nose. It was a desperate, vicious headbutt. I put every ounce of fear and rage I had into it. I felt something shatter. Maybe his nose, maybe my own forehead. The pain was blinding, a white starburst in the green gloom. Vince staggered back, his hands flying to his face. He let out a sound that was pure animal confusion. I didn't wait to see if he recovered. I spun around and threw myself through the water, splashing toward the rear of the habitat. The water was up to my knees now, thick with the black sludge, sucking at my boots like quicksand. "No!" Vince roared behind me. "Don't leave the womb!" I heard him splashing after me. I grabbed the handle of the transfer trunk hatch. It was slick with condensation and slime. I hauled on it, spinning the wheel. The pressure differential made it fight me, sucking the door inward. "Come on! Come on!" I screamed at the metal. The wheel turned. The latches disengaged with a metallic clank. I yanked the door open. The transfer trunk was dark, colder than the habitat. I scrambled through the circular opening, barking my shins on the lip of the hatch. I fell onto the grating inside, gasping for air. Vince hit the door from the other side just as I started to swing it shut. His hand, gray and dripping, shot through the gap, grabbing the edge of the frame. "Gordon," he shrieked, "don't seal it. We need the pressure. We need to equalize." I kicked his hand. I stomped on his fingers with the heavy heel of my dive boot. I felt the bones crush, but he didn't pull back. The fingers just flattened, oozing black fluid, still gripping the steel. "Let go," I yelled, grabbing the interior handle and pulling with everything I had. Vince's face appeared in the gap. It was flattened, distorted, pressed against the jamb. He was trying to squeeze his head through. "She's here," he screamed, his eyes rolling wildly. "She's entering." Behind him, in the habitat, I heard a sound that will haunt me until the day I die. It was the sound of the viewport finally giving up. A crack like a thunderclap, followed by the roar of 1,000 waterfalls. The ocean entered the habitat. The force of the water hitting the back of the room must have been immense. Vince was ripped away from the door as if he weighed nothing. 1 second he was there, screaming at me, and the next he was just gone, sucked backward into the swirling vortex of the flooding chamber. I slammed the hatch shut. I spun the locking wheel, screaming with the effort, feeling the metal bite into my palms. I felt the thud of water hitting the other side of the door, a massive, heavy impact that shook the entire rig. The seal hissed, then held. I collapsed on the grating, hyperventilating. The silence in the trunk was sudden and terrifying. Just the sound of my own ragged breathing and the dripping of condensation. I was safe. I was separated from the habitat. Vince was gone. He was drowning, or imploding, or whatever happens when 25 atmospheres of pressure hit a compromised biological form. But I wasn't safe. I rolled over, looking down through the grating. The transfer trunk is a vertical cylinder. Above me was the hatch to the habitat exterior, which was useless without a bell. To my side was the hatch I had just come through. And below me was the diving bell. The hatch to the bell was still open. I had left it open. And I remembered what I had seen before I ran back to the habitat. The Miller thing. The suit filled with sludge. I scrambled to my feet, grabbing the railing. I looked down into the dark opening of the bell. The green light from my chem light barely reached the bottom. But I could see it. It was standing on the platform of the bell, looking up at me. The headless diving suit. The black sludge forming that mockery of a face. It hadn't moved. It had waited. "Gordon." The synthesized voice came from the speaker on the wall of the trunk. "You cut off the limb, but the body remains." I looked around the trunk frantically. I was trapped in a steel tube, maybe 4 feet wide and 8 feet tall. Above me, sealed. Beside me, a flooded room with a dead man. Below me, a monster. I was in the gauntlet. And there was no way out. "What do you want?" I yelled at the thing below. "You have the habitat. You have Vince. What do you want with me?" The thing in the suit began to climb the ladder again. It moved slowly, deliberately. One heavy boot on a rung, then the next. "We want the needle removed," the voice said. "We want the poison to stop." It was coming for me. In this confined space, I couldn't fight it. It was made of the sludge. It couldn't be hurt, couldn't be choked. If it touched me, if that black slime got on my skin, I would end up like Vince. I would become part of the family. I needed a weapon. I had lost the flare gun. I had nothing but the chem light and the clothes on my back. Think. Physics. Delta P. I looked at the hatch I had just sealed, the one leading to the flooded habitat. The habitat was now at ambient ocean pressure, about 360 psi. The transfer trunk and the bell were still pressurized to the storage depth, which was balanced, but slightly lower than the surge pressure of a catastrophic breach. If I opened the valve that equalized the trunk with the habitat, water would rush in, but that wouldn't help. It would just drown me. I looked at the bell. It was clamped to the bottom of the trunk. The clamp was hydraulic. If I released the bell while the internal hatch was open, the pressure in the trunk would blow out into the ocean. It would be an explosive decompression. I would be sucked out through the hole in the bottom along with the Miller thing. We would both be ejected into the abyss. That was suicide. But wait. The bell had an outer door. The bottom hatch. It was currently open to the ocean, the mool. That's how the Miller thing got in. If I could seal the bell... No, I couldn't seal the bell from up here. The Miller thing was halfway up the ladder. I could see the glistening texture of the sludge where a neck should be. It smelled of ancient rot. I looked at the pipe wrench I had dropped earlier. It was lying on the grating near the hatch to the habitat. I grabbed it. It was heavy, cold iron. I waited. The thing reached the top of the ladder. It reached a gloved hand through the opening in the floor grating. I swung the wrench. I brought it down on the hand with everything I had. There was a wet squelch, and the glove flattened. The thing didn't scream. It didn't recoil. It just kept gripping the grating. It pulled itself up. The shoulders of the suit cleared the opening. I swung again, aiming for the head. The wrench passed through the sludge with a sickening sucking sound. It splashed the black fluid across the walls, across my face. It burned like acid. I wiped my eyes frantically, terror spiking in my chest. It didn't have a skull. There was nothing to break. The thing grabbed my ankle. Its grip was crushing. I felt the bones in my ankle shift. I screamed and kicked out with my other foot, driving my boot into the chest of the suit. It was like kicking a sandbag. It dragged me down. I slid across the grating, my fingernails scraping on the steel. It was pulling me into the bell. "Do not resist," the voice droned. Assimilation is inevitable. I was halfway down the hole. My waist was wedged in the opening. The thing was below me, pulling, its strength absolute. I looked up at the wall of the trunk. There was a panel there, a red lever behind a plastic guard. Emergency umbilical sever. It was the manual cut for the lines feeding the bell. Gas, hot water, comms, electricity. If I pulled that, the bell would lose power. It would lose heat. But it wouldn't detach the bell. Next to it was another lever. Yellow, striped with black. Bell mating clamp. Manual release. If I pulled that, the hydraulic clamps holding the bell to the trunk would blow. The bell would drop away. But the hatch between us was open. If the bell dropped, the seal would break. The ocean pressure would rush in to fill the vacuum of the trunk. Or, if the pressure was higher inside, we would blow out. At 800 feet, the pressure is roughly 24 atmospheres. Inside the trunk, we were pressurized to 24 atmospheres to match it. So there wouldn't be an explosion. There would just be separation. The bell would fall. Gravity would take it. I reached for the yellow lever. My fingers grazed the plastic guard. The thing pulled harder. My hips slid through the opening. I was falling into the bell, right into its arms. "You are going down, Gordon," the voice mocked. "Down to the roots." "Not today," I gritted out. I lunged upward, stretching my arm until the shoulder popped. I hooked my fingers around the yellow lever. I ripped the plastic guard off. I pulled the lever down. Clunk hiss. The sound of hydraulic locks disengaging is loud. It sounded like a gunshot in the confined space. The floor dropped out from under me. The bell detached. For a split second, there was a gap. A ring of black water appeared between the bottom of the trunk and the top of the bell. The Miller thing was holding my ankle. It was standing in the bell. I was hanging from the trunk. Gravity took over. The bell was heavy, tons of steel and lead ballast. It dropped like a stone. The thing held on. It was strong, unnaturally strong. It was pulling me out of the trunk. I was sliding. My fingers clawed at the grating, at the smooth steel walls. I was going to be pulled out into the open ocean, 800 feet down, with no helmet. I kicked. I screamed. I thrased. The suit's grip held. Then, the umbilical snapped. The lines connecting the bell to the rig, the ones Henson said were severed but must have been partially intact, went taut. The bell jerked violently as it hit the end of the slack. The jerk tore the thing's grip loose. I scrambled upward, clawing my way back into the trunk, just as the bell plummeted into the dark. I lay on the grating, staring down into the abyss. The bell was gone. The light from my chem light faded into the black water below. I was alone in the transfer trunk. The bottom was open to the ocean. The water was right there, lapping at the grating, freezing and black. The interface between the gas in the trunk and the water below was shimmering. I was trapped. Above me, a sealed hatch to the outside world, useless without a bell to transfer to. Beside me, a flooded habitat filled with the sludge and Vince's corpse. Below me, the open ocean, a vertical drop to the seafloor where the creature was waiting. I curled into a ball on the grating, shivering uncontrollably. The cold was setting in fast. The helium strips body heat away faster than air. My teeth were chattering so hard I thought they would crack. I had no comms. The speaker was silent. Henson was gone. Vince was gone. I checked my pockets. I had the chem light. I had the wrench. And I had a small, waterproof pouch with my dive tables and a pencil. I looked at the pressure gauge on the wall. It was holding steady. The gas bubble in the trunk was keeping the water out, just like an upside-down cup pushed into a bucket. But the gas would cool. It would contract. The water would rise. And the sludge. I looked at the water surface in the moon pool below me. The black sludge was rising. It wasn't mixing with the water. It was floating on top of it. It was bubbling up from the deep, drawn to the air pocket. It was climbing the walls. I scrambled up the small ladder to the upper platform of the trunk, as high as I could get. I huddled against the top hatch. I was going to die here. I was going to freeze, or suffocate, or be consumed by the sludge. "Think," I whispered to myself, my voice a pathetic squeak. "Think, Gordon. You're a technician. Solve the problem." Problem, trapped at depth. No extraction vehicle. Variable, the rig is a syringe. It pumps down. Variable, the habitat is flooded. Variable, the pressure. I looked at the wall separating me from the flooded habitat. There was a valve there. A large red wheel labeled emergency ballast blow. It was designed to blow high-pressure air into the habitat's ballast tanks to surface the rig in an emergency. But the lines were connected to the habitat's main pressure vessel. If I could pressurize the habitat... No, it was breached. The air would just bubble out the window. But wait, The rig had a delta P system for the injection lines, a massive pressure differential used to force the sedative down. If I could tap into that, no, that was insane. I looked at the upper hatch, the one leading to the outside, where the bell used to mate. It had a small viewport. I shone my chem light through it. Darkness, just the ocean. But then I saw it. Something was moving out there. Not the creature, not the fish. It was a cable. A frayed steel cable, dangling from the structure above. It was swaying in the current, hitting the side of the trunk with a dull clank. The severed lift line. It was maybe 3 feet away from the hatch. If I opened the top hatch, the gas in the trunk would escape. I would have seconds before the water rushed in and crushed me or drowned me. But if I was wearing a suit, I looked around the trunk. There was one suit left, an emergency bailout rig hanging on the wall. It was a simple neoprene dry suit with a small pony bottle, maybe 10 minutes of air. No hot water, no comms, just a mask and a tank. It was suicide. A free ascent from 800 feet? The bends would kill me before I reached 400. My blood would turn to foam. I would have a stroke, a heart attack, and an aneurysm all at the same time. Unless I didn't go all the way up. Unless I used the physics of the rig against itself. The needle was a hollow pylon. The structure itself was a tube. Henson had mentioned the injection line ran through the center leg. If I could get inside the leg, the injection line was pressurized. But the leg was a maintenance shaft. It would be dry. It would be at atmospheric pressure. If I could find a maintenance hatch on the leg, I could cycle into it. But to get there, I had to go outside, into the water, with the creature, with the cold. I looked at the sludge rising below me. It was 5 feet away now. It was forming shapes. Little hands, little faces. "Gordon," the sludge whispered, mimicking Vince's voice perfectly. "Come down. It's warm." I grabbed the emergency suit. I stripped off my jumpsuit, shaking with the cold. I pulled on the neoprene. It was tight, stiff with age. I strapped the pony bottle to my chest. I pulled the mask over my face. I looked at the top hatch. I had to equalize the trunk with the ocean to open it. I had to let the water in to get out. I grabbed the flood valve. "Physics," I whispered. "Don't fail me now." I spun the wheel. The water roared in. The gas rushed out. The cold hit me like a hammer. I pushed the hatch open and swam out into the abyss. I hit the water like a dropped stone. It wasn't just cold. It was a physical impact, a sledgehammer blow that drove the air from my lungs and turned my skin into a sheet of burning ice. The pressure was immediate and crushing. At 800 feet, the ocean doesn't just surround you, it owns you. It pushed against my mask, my chest, my eardrums, trying to find a weakness, trying to squeeze the life out of the soft, fleshy thing that had dared to enter its domain. I didn't have time to think about the bends. I didn't have time to think about the nitrogen bubbles already forming in my blood, turning my veins into soda water. I had one goal, the leg, the central pylon of the rig. It was 50 feet away, a massive barnacle-encrusted column disappearing into the gloom above and below. I kicked hard, my fins cutting through the black water. The chem light clipped to my harness was a pathetic beacon, illuminating nothing but the swirling particulate matter and the endless dark. But I knew where the leg was. I had studied the schematics. I had memorized the layout of the needle before I even signed the contract. Something brushed against my leg. It wasn't water turbulence. It was solid. It was slick. I spun around, shining the green light into the void. Nothing. just the empty ocean, but I could feel it. The displacement, the pressure wave of something massive moving just outside my vision. The creature was here. It wasn't in the habitat anymore. It was out here, in its element, hunting. I swam harder, my breath rasping in the regulator. The pony bottle on my chest was small, maybe 15 minutes of air at surface pressure. Down here, under 25 atmospheres, it would last maybe 3. Every breath was a precious, finite resource. I reached the pylon. The concrete was rough, covered in sharp, calcified growth. I clawed at it, pulling myself along, searching for the maintenance hatch. It should be here. Level 800, an access port for the structural integrity sensors. My hand hit something smooth. Metal. I wiped away the slime and silt. A wheel. A small, recessed locking wheel set into the concrete. I grabbed it and turned. It didn't budge. It was seized by years of corrosion and pressure. "Come on," I screamed into my mouthpiece, my voice a tinny squeak. "Come on." I braced my feet against the pylon and pulled with everything I had. My muscles screamed. The nitrogen narcosis was setting in, making my head swim, making the darkness pulse with colors that weren't there. I saw faces in the barnacles. I saw Vince's smile in the rust. Turn. The wheel groaned. A bubble of gas escaped from the seal. It moved, just an inch. Then I felt it. A tentacle the thickness of a tree trunk wrapped around my waist. It didn't squeeze. It just held me. It was gentle, almost tender. The suckers on the underside clamped onto my dry suit, pulling me away from the pylon. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see it. I just held onto the wheel. "Let go," I shouted, kicking blindly behind me. My fin connected with something soft and yielding. The tentacle tightened. It pulled harder. My grip on the wheel was slipping. My fingers were numb, useless claws. I was going to die here. I was going to be pulled into the dark and eaten, or assimilated, or whatever hell awaited the crew of the Needle. Then I remembered the wrench. I still had it. I had clipped it to my belt when I left the transfer trunk. A 24-inch pipe wrench, heavy iron. I let go of the wheel with one hand and fumbled for the tool. The creature sensed the movement. The tentacle jerked, slamming me against the concrete. My mask cracked. Water trickled in, salty and cold, stinging my eyes. I grabbed the wrench. I didn't swing it. You can't swing underwater. The resistance is too high. I jammed it. I jammed the jaws of the wrench into the soft flesh of the tentacle wrapped around me. I twisted the adjustment nut, clamping the iron teeth onto the muscle. The creature shuddered. A sound vibrated through the water, a low-frequency moan that rattled my teeth. It wasn't pain. It was surprise. I twisted the wrench harder, using it as a lever, digging the teeth in until they hit something hard, cartilage or bone. The tentacle released me. It whipped away, thrashing in the water, churning the silt into a blinding cloud. I didn't wait. I grabbed the wheel with both hands and spun it. It turned. Once. Twice. The hatch popped open. It wasn't a large opening, just big enough for a man to squeeze through. Inside it was dark, but dry. I could see a ladder, a narrow shaft leading up. I shoved myself into the hole. My tank scraped against the frame. I kicked, pushing myself through, fighting the buoyancy of the suit. Something grabbed my fin. I screamed, thrashing, kicking. The creature was trying to pull me back out. I unbuckled the fin. I let it go. I tumbled into the shaft, falling onto a metal grating. I scrambled backward, kicking the hatch shut with my remaining fin. I spun the internal locking wheel, sealing it just as a heavy thud shook the door. I was inside. I ripped the mask off my face, gasping for air. The air in the shaft was stale, metallic, and cold, but it was breathable. It was at atmospheric pressure. I lay there in the dark, shivering, listening to the creature pounding on the hull outside. Thud. 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 It sounded like a heartbeat. A massive, angry heartbeat. I checked my gauges. The pony bottle was empty. I had made it with seconds to spare, but I wasn't safe yet. I was inside the leg of the rig, but I was still 800 feet down. And I was sick. The bends. I could feel it starting. A dull ache in my joints, like toothache in my knees and elbows. The nitrogen bubbles were expanding. If I didn't get to a hyperbaric chamber, or at least get back under pressure, I would be crippled or dead within hours. But there was no chamber. The habitat was gone. The bell was gone. I looked up the shaft. It was a long vertical tunnel, filled with pipes and cables. In the center ran a massive, stainless steel conduit, the injection line. It was pulsing. I could hear the fluid rushing through it, a wet, slithering sound. I had to get to the surface. I started to climb. The ladder was endless. Every rung was a battle. My joints felt like they were filled with broken glass. My vision was tunneling, black spots dancing at the edges of my sight. I climbed for what felt like hours. 500 feet. 400 feet. The pain got worse. My skin was itching, a sensation like thousands of ants crawling under my dermis. The skin bends. I stopped at a platform to rest. I leaned against the injection pipe. It was warm, vibrating. I looked at it closely. There was a viewport, a small glass window set into the steel to monitor the flow. I shone my chem light into it. The black sludge was moving inside. But it wasn't just flowing, it was swimming. Millions of tiny pale shapes were suspended in the fluid. They looked like tadpoles, but with human faces. Distorted, screaming faces. I recoiled, retching. "We are the future," a voice whispered. It wasn't the speaker this time. It was in my head. I looked up. Standing on the platform above me was Vince. He wasn't wearing a suit. He was naked, his skin gray and slick with the black oil. He looked like he had been flayed. "Don't leave us, Gordon," he said. His voice was normal now. No helium squeak. Just Vince. "It's so lonely up there." "You're dead," I croaked. "I saw you die." "Death is just a phase change," Vince said, smiling. "Like water to steam, we just changed state." He reached down a hand. "Come back down. The mother is waiting." I closed my eyes. "It's the nitrogen," I whispered to myself. "It's the narcosis." He's not there. I opened my eyes. He was still there. I pulled the pipe wrench from my belt. It was heavy, comforting. "Get out of my way, Vince." He laughed. "You can't hurt me, Gordon. I'm oil. I'm the earth." I climbed. I climbed right past him. As I passed, he swiped at me. His hand passed through my shoulder like smoke. He was a hallucination. My brain was cooking itself. "You're dying," the phantom Vince whispered behind me. "Your blood is turning to foam. You'll never make it." He was right. The pain was unbearable now. I couldn't feel my feet. My hands were claws, locked onto the rungs by rigor rather than strength. I reached the 200-foot level. There was a bulkhead here, a sealed door leading to the upper machinery spaces. It was locked. I pounded on it. "Help! Is anyone there?" Help me. Silence. I slumped against the door. This was it. I had climbed 600 feet just to die in a hallway. Then I saw the panel. Emergency override. Injection control. It was a small console set into the wall. A keypad and a red button. If I couldn't get out, maybe I could stop the flow. Maybe I could stop the poison. I smashed the plastic cover with the wrench. I hit the red button. Nothing happened. System locked, a mechanical voice said. Topside override active. Henson. He had locked us out. He was still up there, sitting in his chair, watching us die on the telemetry. Henson. I screamed at the ceiling. I know you can hear me. Open the door. Static crackled from a speaker above the door. Gordon? It was Henson. He sounded shocked. Open it. I yelled. I'm at the 200 level. Open the goddamn door. I can't, Henson stammered. The company, they're here. They're scrubbing the site. They think you're dead. I'm not dead yet. I roared. But I will be if you don't open this door. If I open it, they'll know, Henson whispered. They'll kill us both. They're going to kill you anyway. I shouted. You think they're going to let a witness walk away? You're a liability, Henson. Just like me. Silence. Henson. I'm sorry, Gordon. The line clicked dead. I stared at the speaker. I wanted to cry, but I didn't have the moisture left in my body. I looked at the injection pipe again. It ran right through the platform, disappearing into the ceiling. There was a valve. A manual pressure relief valve. It was huge, a massive wheel painted yellow. If I opened that, the pressure in the line was immense. If I opened it, the sludge would spray out. It would fill the shaft. It would kill me. But it would also depressurize the line. The flow to the creature would stop. The syringe would be empty. Don't do it. The Phantom Vince whispered. If you stop the flow, she wakes up. She wakes up and she breaks the world. Good, I said. I grabbed the wheel. I put my feet against the pipe and pulled. It wouldn't move. My body was failing. I didn't have the strength. I looked at the wrench. I jammed the handle of the wrench into the spokes of the wheel. I used it as a breaker bar. I hung my entire weight on it. Creak. The metal groaned. Gordon, please, Vince screamed, his face twisting into a mask of terror. You don't know what you're doing. I'm quitting, I gritted out. I pulled. The wheel turned. There was a hiss. A jet of black sludge sprayed from the valve seal, hitting me in the chest. It burned. It smelled of death. I didn't stop. I spun the wheel. Once. Twice. The hiss became a roar. The valve blew. A geyser of black fluid erupted into the shaft. It hit the ceiling, coating everything in slime. The pressure wave knocked me backward. I slammed into the locked door, sliding down to the floor. The pipe began to vibrate. A deep, resonant hum that shook the fillings in my teeth. The flow had stopped. The pressure was venting into the shaft instead of down to the creature. Below me, deep in the dark, something screamed. It wasn't a whale sound. It wasn't an animal sound. It was the sound of a tectonic plate shifting. It was the sound of the earth waking up. The rig shook. The metal groaned. She's coming, Vince whispered, fading away into the mist of oil. She's coming up. The door behind me clicked. Clunkus. It swung open. I fell backward out of the shaft and onto a metal deck. Bright white light blinded me. I squinted, holding up a hand. Henson was standing there. He was holding a fire axe. He looked terrified. "You did it," he whispered, staring at the black sludge spraying into the shaft. "You crazy son of a bitch, you actually did it." "Help me," I rasped. He dropped the axe and grabbed my harness. He dragged me across the deck, away from the open shaft. "We have to go," he said. "The helicopter is on the pad. The company men, they're in the control room. They're trying to stabilize the rig." "The rig is dead," I said. "It's over." He dragged me up a flight of stairs, out into the rain. The storm was raging. The wind howled, tearing at my suit. The waves were crashing over the lower decks 40 feet below. But the rig was moving. It wasn't swaying in the wind. It was rising. The pylon, the massive concrete leg I had just climbed, was being pushed up out of the water. I looked over the railing. The ocean was boiling. The black sludge was spreading across the surface, an oil slick the size of a city. And rising out of it, wrapped around the leg of the rig, was a tentacle. It was immense. It was the size of a skyscraper. It was pale, translucent, pulsing with light. It wrapped around the platform, crushing the steel like foil. "Go!" Henson screamed, shoving me toward the helipad. The chopper was there, rotors turning. The pilot was frantically waving us over. We ran. I hobbled, my joints screaming, Henson half carrying me. We threw ourselves into the cabin just as the rig lurched violently to the side. "Take off," Henson yelled at the pilot. "Go! Go!" The chopper lifted. The wind buffeted us, tossing the machine like a toy. I looked out the window. The needle was gone. The creature had pulled it down. The entire platform, thousands of tons of steel and concrete, was being dragged beneath the waves. And in the center of the boiling black water, I saw it. The face. It was miles wide, a pale, eyeless mask staring up at the sky. Its mouth was open, swallowing the wreckage, and then it sank. The ocean closed over it. The waves crashed together, erasing the evidence. I spent 3 months in a hyperbaric chamber in a naval hospital in Virginia. They told me I had the worst case of decompression sickness ever recorded in a survivor. My joints are fused. I walk with a cane. My hands shake so bad I can't hold a cup of coffee without spilling it. Henson disappeared. The company said he died in the accident. They said it was a rogue wave, a structural failure, an act of God. They paid me a settlement that could buy a small country. The NDA I signed this time was the size of a Bible. If I talk, I lose the money. If I talk, I go to jail. But I don't care about the money. And I don't care about jail. I live in the desert now. Arizona, as far from the ocean as you can get without leaving the planet. I have a small house with triple-paned windows and steel shutters. I don't sleep much. When I do, I dream of the black rain. I dream of Vince. Sometimes, late at night, when the wind howls across the mesa, I hear it. Clang. A tapping on the shutters. I know it's not the wind. The wind doesn't have a rhythm. I check the glass every morning. I look for fingerprints. I look for moisture. Because the last time I looked, the rules hadn't changed. Keep the shutters closed. And I know something else too. Something I realized when I saw that face in the water. We didn't kill it. We didn't stop it. We just woke it up. And the ocean covers 70% of the world. There is nowhere to run. So I sit here, in the dry, and I wait for the tide to rise.